So we started going over Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar. By the grace of Allah and by His granting privilege to us, we started going over Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar by Imam Abu Hanifa. And we started reading through the text and just unraveling the text with basic translation and some explanation to clarify the meanings of the statements of the Imam, rahimahullah ta'ala. And to remind you what I was doing, also, I was searching for the 13 attributes that are obligatory for every accountable person to know. And I remember that I counted 11 out of 13 so far as where we got. So we're going to just do a quick recap, get back to where we left off and continue from there bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. قال الإمام أبو حنيفة رضي الله عنه. Imam Abu Hanifa, may Allah accept from him, said, أصل التوحيد وما يصح الاعتقاد عليه. The base of monotheism, Tawheed. Tawheed, for your information, that's a source noun. You're following in the Sarf lessons now. That's a source noun from wahada yuwahidu, tawheeda. Wahada means to make one, to make one. That's why some people, they translate tawheed as unity, because unity means to make one. But we usually don't say the unity of Allah. But some people, that's how they say it. We say the oneness or the monotheism. Aslu Tawheed, the base of Tawheed, وَمَا يَصِحُّ الِاعْتِقَادُ عَلَيْهِ, and that by which conviction is valid. يَجِبُ أَنْ يَقُول, it is obligatory to say, yani to believe. To say meaning to have the position. Like we said, it doesn't mean it's obligatory to literally say these words. It's going to be obligatory on you to say the Shahada. It's going to be obligatory on you to recite Al-Fatiha and recite Tashahhud in your prayer and say the other words of the prayer. And any other obligation that the religion spelled out for you. But this, what Abu Hanifa presents to us here, is not an obligation to say per se. So what's meant here is to say it means to have that position, to believe in it. To say, Amantu billah, I believe in Allah. And we are in the process of explaining about our belief in Allah. وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ وَكُتُبِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ وَالْبَعْثِ بَعْدَ الْمَوْتِ وَالْقَدَرِ خَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ مِنَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And in His angels and His books and His messengers and resurrection after death and destiny, its good and its evil from God, exalted is He. وَالْحِسَابِ وَالْمِيزَانِ وَالْجَنَّةِ وَالنَّارِ وَذَلِكَ حَقٌّ كُلُّهُ. And I believe in the reckoning, yani the questioning or the presentation of the deeds, and the balance, which is the scale upon which the deeds will be weighed, and the garden and the fire, meaning heaven and hell. And that is true, all of it, or that is true entirely. And I mentioned for you that, like all these topics in so many of the books of Aqidah, the scholars mentioned them later, after first talking about the oneness of God and the attributes of Allah, and talking about prophethood, like talking about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then they start to say these things here. And this start to the metin of Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar, it's a strong start because it mentions the most important matters of the creed that are mentioned in the hadith of Jibreel, like I mentioned for you. Why that's a strong start? Because hadith of Jibreel is very fundamental evidence in the religion, very important evidence in Aqidah. Do you have your aqidah proofs gathered? Your ayahs and your hadiths? You have some of them. So the hadith of Jibreel is very fundamental one in the aqidah. And not only for that reason, it's a strong start, but because if someone is learning this here, that this is his religion, this is what he must believe. He has to believe in God and his angels and his books and his messengers and resurrection after death and destiny and reckoning, and that the deeds will be weighed and in heaven and hell. Then this gives a person also a broad idea about his belief. So that's a good thing. That even if he doesn't know all the details about that, but it expands for him the scope of his convictions. As opposed to if you had an aqidah and they start by saying, we believe in Allah, and then start telling you about the attributes of Allah before talking about other things, then if that's as much as you know, then you're going to know as much as the book has given you. So you're going to know about God, and then you're going to know about his attributes. Here, this one, someone, if as much as he knows is what's presented to him here, then Abu Hanifa presented to him a good amount of creed, even though he doesn't know a lot of details there. So it's obligatory to believe in Allah and his angels and his books and his messengers and resurrection and destiny and the reckoning and the scale and heaven and hell, and all of that is true. Then Abu Hanifa started to go over the attributes of Allah, so we started counting. He said, Wallahu ta'ala wahid, Allah is one. So that's attribute of oneness, wahdaniyah. La min tariqi al-adad, not by way of number, walakin min tariqi annahu la sharika lah, rather, by way, yani, with the meaning that he has no partner. Lam yalid wa lam yulad, he did not give birth, nor was he begotten, nor was he born. He did not beget, nor was he begotten. He did not give birth, nor was he born. So that's, I mentioned for you, that's a reference to the attribute of oneness. Yani he's continuing to talk about the attribute of oneness. And it's possible to extract from here the attribute of independence. He doesn't need anything. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ, and there was never a match for him. And as you know, he took some ayahs from the Quran and incorporated them into his matan. لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ. Here, in talking about the oneness, he inserted these ayahs from Surah Al-Ikhlas. Now, I have a copy of Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar that has the entire Surah Al-Ikhlas in it. According to this copy, Abu Hanifa says, Allah Ta'ala is one, not by way of count, but by way of that he has no partner. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. So if as-Samad is mentioned in there, then he explicitly will have mentioned the attribute of independence. If as-Samad were mentioned here, then it will have explicitly mentioned the attribute, or have been a reference to the attribute, a direct reference to the attribute of independence, not needing anything, having no requirement. But that's not in this copy we're reading here. So he started by talking about the attribute of oneness. Allah is one, not by way of number, but with the meaning that he has no partner. He did not beget, that means he did not give birth, nor was he begotten, that means he was not born. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ, and there was never a match for him. There was never an equal to him. He never had a similar. There was never anything like him. When we talk about Allah not being like the creations, this does have in it the meaning of oneness. So Allah has an attribute called Al-Wahdaniyah, oneness. And Allah has an attribute called al-mukhalafatu lil hawadith, dissimilarity, being unlike created things. So the attribute of oneness and the attribute of dissimilarity in some ways are synonymous. You can look at oneness in a way that means being dissimilar. You can look at dissimilarity in a way that it means oneness. There's a word in English that covers both those attributes, which is unique. Allah is unique. This means one and it means unlike another. So, out of the 13 attributes, we know that Allah has an attribute called oneness and He has an attribute called dissimilarity. And those two attributes, they have a common meaning. So, there's a shadda missing on the lamb in the fourth ayah. Walam yakul lahu here. It's okay if you don't put the shadda here. Barakallahu fikum. If you don't write it, it's okay. It's not a mistake. So oneness and dissimilarity, they have a common meaning. And also, independence has a meaning with these two. The oneness and the dissimilarity and the independence, they have common meaning also. I'm still looking for explicit words for all the 13 attributes. So far here, he mentioned the attribute of oneness. And he mentioned the attribute of dissimilarity when he said, لا يشبه شيئا من الأشياء. He doesn't resemble anything. من الأشياء من خلقه. He doesn't resemble anything amongst the things of his creations. So that's explicit reference to his attribute of dissimilarity. ولا يشبهه شيء من خلقه. And nothing of his creations resembles him. So then that is two attributes, the oneness and the dissimilarity. Lam yazal, he never ceased to be. That's the eternity. That's the third attribute. Wala yazalu, and he shall never cease to be. That's four. That's everlastingness. بأسمائه وصفاته الذاتية والفعلية. He never ceased to be and shall never cease to be. Yani, he is eternal and everlasting with his names and his attributes. Like Tahawi said, Tahawi is copying Abu Hanifa. So here, Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, he benefited us by telling us that Allah has names, and he benefited us by telling us that Allah has attributes. You might say it's obvious Allah has attributes, but some people denied that Allah has attributes. They even denied the word sifat, actually, is really what I mean to get at. You know, some people denied Allah's attributes, but they denied sifat. They said even sifat, the word sifat doesn't apply. Attributes. So Abu Hanifa, he mentions, he says, بِأَسْمَائِهِ وَصِفَاتِهِ, his names and his attributes. الذَّاتِيَةِ وَالْفِعْلِيَّةِ, and he told us he has self-attributes and doing attributes. Attributes of the self and attributes of doings. أَمَّا الذَّاتِيَّةِ, then he mentioned the self-attributes. فَالْحَيَاةُ وَالْقُدْرَةُ وَالْعِلْمُ وَالْكَلَامُ وَالسَّمْعُ وَالْبَصَرُ وَالْإِرَادَةُ. They are life and power and knowledge and speech and hearing and sight and will. So that's 7 more added to the 4 we just saw. So that's 11. 11 out of the 13. But he still gives us more information though, because he even told us Allah has names. If you learn the 13 attributes, that doesn't mean you're learning about his names. And he told us that Allah has doings or attributes of doings. When you learn the 13 attributes, you don't necessarily learn also that Allah has attributes of doings. And then he named some of them. He said, وَأَمَّا الْفِعْلِيَّةِ, and as for the doings, the attributes of doings, فَالتَّخْلِيقُ وَالتَّرْزِيقُ, they are creating and providing. وَالْإِنشَاء, and initiating. وَالْإِبْدَاع, and uh, making something without it having any previous example. وَالصُّنْعَ, and making. So these are different names for the same attribute. وَغَيْرُ ذَلِكَ مِنْ صِفَاتِ الْفِعْلِ, and other than that amongst the attributes of doing. The Sheikh did say that all of these refer to the same attributes, which is at-taqween, creating. But I want to point out to you also that some scholars, they said these attributes of Allah are uncountable. These doings, because the doings are many, his attributes are uncountable. So they said his life creating is an attribute of his in eternity, and his death creating is an attribute of his in eternity, and his providing is an attribute of his in eternity. His expanding the sustenance is an attribute of his in eternity. His tightening the sustenance is an attribute of his in eternity. All the way until they say his creating movement is an attribute of his in eternity. His creating stillness is an attribute of his in eternity. Is that a strong saying, you ask, about saying each one is an attribute in eternity? That's a good question. So I don't know. We'll ask, inshallah ta'ala. It's a good question. That question is so good that what you're asking me is a reason for me almost not even bringing this case up. Then I was just going to keep on going without even mentioning something, and now you're asking me. So we'll ask, inshallah ta'ala, about these two expressions. Then Abu Hanifa said, وَأَسْمَاؤُهُ صِفَةٌ لَهُ, his names are an attribute of his. Yani, Abu Hanifa is basically saying, Allah is attributed with names. Allah is attributed with names. So that's fine. لم يحدث له صفة ولا اسم. No attribute ever happened to him, nor a name, because his names are eternal. The meaning of his names being eternal, like we mentioned last time, is that he has actually eternal names. Those are not the words we say, because our words are not eternal. So when we say the word Allah, that word is created for sure. And other words like Al-Khaliq, the creator, these expressions, these wordings, these vocalizations, they are created for sure. But they refer to something that's not created. Allah Ta'ala, He has a name in eternity. It's not something created. But He revealed a book to His Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam, informing us that we as creations, we shall call Him Allah with this created expression. And we shall call Him Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim and other names with created expressions. But what those names really refer to is something not created. So that's why Abu Hanifa, he said right here, Lam yazal wa la yazalu bi asma'i. He never ceased to be, and he is eternal and everlasting with his names. And Abu Hanifa said right here, Lam yahduth lahu sifatun wa lasm. No attribute ever happened to him, nor did a name ever happen to him. That means his names are not created. And his attributes are not created. Lam yazal aliman bi ilmi. He never ceased to be a knower by his knowledge. Because his knowledge is eternal, so he's going to be eternally a knower. And he's eternally a knower, so his knowledge is going to be eternal. وَالْعِلْمُ صِفَتُهُ فِي الْأَزَلِ, and his knowledge is his attribute in eternity. So therefore he was a knower in eternity. قَادِرًا بِقُدْرَتِهِ, and powerful by his power. وَالْقُدْرَةُ صِفَةٌ لَهُ فِي الْأَزَلِ, and power is an attribute of his in eternity. وَخَالِقًا بِتَخْلِيقِهِ وَالتَّخْلِيقُ صِفَةٌ لَهُ فِي الْأَزَلِ, and a creator by his creating, and creating is an attribute of his in eternity. And we said that for Abu Hanifa and his followers, there's a difference between saying Allah is powerful by his power and a creator by his creating. And when they say he's powerful by his power, when they say he's powerful by his power and a creator by his creating, they don't mean or say what the later Ash'aris, the majority of the latter day Ash'aris say when they say he is creator by his power. It's like those Ash'aris mixed these when they said he is Khaliq bi qudratihi. Those Ash'aris, they said he is creator by his power. So that's not what Abu Hanifa and his followers say. They say he's powerful by his power and he's a creator by his creating. But if you say he's creator by his power, there's no harm in your creed. But what we learned is the strong way is this way that Abu Hanifa says. This is stronger. To say he's powerful by his power and creator by his creating is stronger than to say he's creator by his power. But like we said, if you're just teaching a beginner, just teach him Allah is creator by his power. Have mercy on him. And if you're not so good at this, have mercy on yourself too. وَالتَّخْلِيقُ صِفَةٌ لَهُ فِي الْأَزَلِ, and creating is an attribute of his in eternity. وَفَاعِلًا بِفِعْلِهِ, and a doer by his doing. وَالْفِعْلُ صِفَةٌ لَهُ فِي الْأَزَلِ, and the doing is an attribute of his in eternity. وَالْفَاعِلُ هُوَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى, and the doer, which means the creator, is Allah, exalted is He. وَالْفِعْلُ صِفَتُهُ فِي الْأَزَلِ, and doing is His attribute in eternity. وَالْمَفْعُولُ مَخْلُوقٌ, and the done thing is created. وَفِعْلُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى غَيْرُ مَخْلُوقٌ, and the doing of Allah Ta'ala is not created. It is uncreated. So that statement is contrary to what Al-Ash'ari said, rahimahullah, and what the latter-day Ash'aris said. They said the doing of Allah is a trace of His power. They said Allah is powerful in eternity, and He had the power in eternity to do something, and His doing is a trace of His power. That means His doing is a creation. So when they say doing, they don't mean an eternal attribute of Allah, because they don't believe that Allah's attributes are created. They say fi'lullah. They say God's doing is atharu qudratihi. It's a trace of His power. They say He was in eternity qadir. Eternally, He was powerful, say the Ash'aris, the latter-day Ash'aris. Eternally, He was powerful. Qadirun ala an yaf'al. He had the power to do. Qadirun ala al-khalq. He had power over creation. So they say, فَالْخَلْقُ وَالْفِعْلُ مَخْلُوقٌ أَثَرُ قُدْرَتِهِ. So creation and doing is created. It's a trace of His power. So now you know the Hanafi way, and you know the Ash'ari way, the latter day Ash'ari way. There are still Ash'aris who say the Hanafi way. Earlier Ash'aris, they said the Hanafi way here, and some of the latter day ones also said it the Hanafi way, like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. He agrees with this here, and our Shaykh, rahimahullah, he agrees with this here. Then Abu Hanifa said, وَصِفَاتُهُ فِي الْأَزَلِ غَيْرُ مُحْدَثَةٍ وَلَا مَخْلُوقَةٍ, and His attributes in eternity are not eventual, nor created. فَمَنْ قَالَ إِنَّهَا مَخْلُوقَةٌ أَوْ مُحْدَثَةٌ. So anyone who says that they are created or eventual, أَوْ وَقَفَ أَوْ شَكَّ فِيهَا, or he's neutral, not taking any position, not taking either position, or he's doubtful, he's not sure which one. فَهُوَ كَافِرٌ, فَهُوَ كَافِرٌ بِاللَّهِ, then he's a disbeliever in God. So his attributes are eternal, uncreated. You could extract from there that he doesn't need anything. Then Abu Hanifa, he went to talk about the attribute of speech more, and to talk about the attribute of speech with detail. And this is the case, the attribute of speech needs detail. Qad you call this topic needs room to breathe. If you look in the other books of Aqidah, you will see when they talk about the speech of Allah and the Quran, they talk about it with more details than other attributes, even if the book itself is a very small, brief one. This book is a small, brief booklet. But the amount of details in this brief booklet about the speech of Allah in comparison to other topics is, we're going to say it's detailed by comparison. Here he brought back the topic of the speech of God and using the word Al-Quran. And so he says, well, Qur'anu kalamullahi ta'ala. And the Quran is God's speech. Exalted is He. That means that's His attribute. Fil masahifi maktub. In the scriptures, it is written. So maktub here doesn't mean kitaba. This doesn't mean in the scriptures, it is a writing. It is a writing in the scriptures. No. God's speech is not a writing in the scriptures. That's the writing is the kitaba. It is written. God's speech is written in the scriptures. That means what is the writing that's in these scriptures refers to God's speech. That's what it means to say God's speech is written in the scriptures. That means the writing in the scriptures refers to God's speech. وَفِي الْقُلُوبِ مَحْفُوظ, and in the hearts it is preserved or memorized. So in the hearts, the Quran, which is God's attribute, is mahfuz, not the hifz. His attribute is not the hifz. The hifz is the memorization or the memory. The hifz is the memory or the memorization itself. That's your attribute as a creature. His speech is not the hifz, it's the mahfuz. His speech is what is memorized. Meaning what you have memorized refers to. Meaning, when we talk about what you memorized, that amounts to something that you will envision in your heart and imagine in your heart and summon and conjure in your heart. So this, what you conjure in your heart and summon in your heart, like Al-Fatiha, because you memorized it from beginning to end. And you envision something in yourself when you think about this Fatiha that you memorized, or Surah Al-Ikhlas and Mu'awwidhat and Ayatul Kursi, or whatever you have memorized of the Quran. So that refers to the attribute of Allah. That refers to the attribute of Allah. So that's what it means, that Allah's attribute is mahfuz. It's not the hifz, it's what the hifz refers to. Hifz meaning memory. وَعَلَى الْأَلْسُنِ مَقْرُوء, and upon the tongues it is recited. So the attribute of God is recited. That doesn't mean the attribute of God is the recitation. It's not the qira'ah. The recitation is our attribute, is our doing, our created action is the recitation. His attribute is the maqru'. It's what's recited. That means what the recitation refers to. وَعَلَى النَّبِيِّ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ مُنَزَّل, and upon the Prophet May peace and blessings be upon him. It is revealed. It's not the revelation, it's what the revelation refers to. So his attribute is revealed, meaning what the revelation refers to. And then Abu Hanifa says what I just told you. وَلَفْظُنَا بِالْقُرْآنِ مَخْلُوقٌ. Our pronunciation, our wording, our verbalizing, our vocalization of the Quran is creation. وَكِتَابَتُنَا لَهُ مَخْلُوقَةٌ. And our writing of it. So not what's written, not what the writing refers to, just the writing itself. Our writing of it is created. وَقِرَاءَتُنَا لَهُ مَخْلُوقَةٌ. And our recitation of it is created. وَالْقُرْآنُ غَيْرُ مَخْلُوقٍ. And the Quran, which is God's speech, it is not created. So before I go forward, any question here? Maybe I'm going fast and this is high concept and it's not soaking in easy. So if you have a question, go ahead and ask me, please. That's good. We've taken all of this before, alhamdulillah. And Abu Hanifa continues to talk about the speech of Allah. So he says, وَمَا ذَكَرَهُ اللَّهُ فِي الْقُرْآنِ حِكَايَةً عَنْ مُوسَى وَغَيْرِهِ مِنَ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ. And what Allah mentioned in the Quran, citing Moses and other prophets, وَعَنْ فِرْعَوْنَ وَإِبْلِيسِ, and citing Pharaoh and Satan, فَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ كُلَّهُ كَلَامُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى إِخْبَارًا عَنْهُمْ. Indeed, all of that entirely is God's speech. Exalted is He, telling about them. وَكَلَامُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى غَيْرُ مَخْلُوقٍ. And the speech of Allah, exalted is He, is not created. وَكَلَامُ مُوسَى وَغَيْرِهِ مِنَ الْمَخْلُوقِينَ مَخْلُوقٍ. And the speech of Moses and others amongst created beings is created. وَالْقُرْآنُ كَلَامُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فَهُوَ قَدِيمٌ. But the Quran is God's speech, so it is eternal. لَا كَلَامُهُمْ. Not their speech. So next time you look in the book of Aqidah, then take note of how lengthy the talk about the speech of God and the Quran is compared to other topics. In the Aqidah of An-Nasafi, he talks at length about the Kalam, more lengthy than other topics in his small booklet by comparison, and also At-Tahawi, and also other books. Also As-Siratul Mustaqim by our Shaykh. Even in the Mukhtasar, the Shaykh, he stops on the attribute of Kalam to say something in particular. You'll review that there. Abu Hanifa says, Rahimahullah, وَسَمِعَ مُوسَى كَلَامَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And Moses heard the speech of God, exalted is He. قَالَ تَعَالَى. The exalted said, وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. God spoke a speech to Moses. God literally spoke to Moses. وَقَدْ كَانَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى مُتَكَلِّمًا. And God was in eternity a speaker, exalted is He. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ كَلَّمَ مُوسَى. And He did not in eternity speak to Moses because Moses wasn't existing in eternity. وَقَدْ كَانَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى خَالِقًا فِي الْأَزَلِ. And in the same meaning, we say Allah was a creator in eternity. وَلَمْ يَخْلُقِ الْخَلْقِ. And the creation wasn't created. He still was creator and the creation wasn't created. Without creation being created, He was creator. And without speaking to Moses, He was a speaker. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. Unlike Him is there anything whatsoever. And He is the hearer, the seer. So we're still up to 11 attributes. We're still waiting to see existence and independence. فَلَمَّا كَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى كَلَّمَهُ بِكَلَامِهِ الَّذِي هُوَ لَهُ صِفَةٌ فِي الْأَزَلِ. So when He spoke to Moses, meaning when Moses was in existence, when Moses occurred and happened, then Allah spoke to Moses with His eternal speech, meaning Allah made Moses hear his speech and understand something from it. وصفاته كلها بخلاف صفات المخلوقين. And his attributes, all of them are different from the attributes of the created beings. That is, even if we use the same word, even if we use, even if there's an agreement in expression, his attributes, all of his attributes are different from the attributes of created beings. So therefore, يَعْلَمُ لَا كَعِلْمِنَا. He knows, not like we know, not like our knowledge. He knows, not like our knowledge. And notice, Abu Hanifa didn't say here, لا يعلم كعلمنا. He doesn't know like we know. He rather said, he knows, unlike we know. So that confirms the attribute. He knows, unlike we know. As opposed to saying, he does not know, like we know. Maybe if you see some translations of Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar, look here and see how the translator did. See if he caught Abu Hanifa's point or he missed it. He knows, not like we know. يَقُدِرُ لَا كَقُدْرَتِنَا. He has power unlike our power. يَرَى لَا كَرُؤْيَتِنَا. He sees not like our sight. So it's not similar even if there's an agreement in expression. يَتَكَلَّمُ لَا كَكَلَامِنَا. He speaks not like our speech. وَيَسْمَعُ لَا كَسَمْعِنَا. And he hears unlike our hearing. نحن نتكلم بالآلات والحروف. We speak with tools. With okay. We speak with tools and letters. والله تعالى يتكلم بلا حروف ولا آلة. And Allah speaks without letters and without a tool. والحروف مخلوقة. And letters are created. وكلام الله تعالى غير مخلوق. And the speech of Allah Ta'ala is uncreated. وهو شيء لا كالأشياء. And he is something unlike anything. There's the attribute of existence. That's explicit. That's explicit mentioning of the attribute of existence. وهو شيء لا كالأشياء. And he is something unlike anything. ومعنى الشيء إثباته بلا جسم ولا جوهر ولا عرض. And the meaning of being something is confirming him without body, ولا جوهر, nor atom, ولا عرض, nor property. So that means right there he doesn't need anything. ولا حد له. And he has no edge. ولا ضد له. And he has no adversary, a mukrah, ولا مغالب, ولا نظير له. Yeah. ولا ند له. And he has no likeness. ولا مثل له. And he has no similarity. And then Abu Hanifa went to talk about another category of attributes. So you see how his metin has all about the attributes of Allah. He mentioned the names of Allah, he mentioned attributes of Allah, and he mentioned names. He mentioned that Allah has names, that he has attributes, and that he has self attributes, and that he has action attributes. And he mentioned the ma'ani attributes together, and he mentioned the salbiya attributes together. And he mentioned the everlastingness before he mentioned the ma'ani attributes. Why I mentioned that? Because some scholars said everlastingness is amongst the ma'ani. But he mentioned the everlastingness when he was mentioning the salbiya attributes. So he gave you all about the attributes. So if you know what he's saying, then he just gave you uh, so many subsections in the topic of the attributes of Allah. And now he gives you another subsection, which is the chapter of the mutashabih attributes. Mutashabih means ambiguous. Ambiguous means susceptible to more than one meaning. Even if you understand the language, its meaning is not necessarily clear. So Abu Hanifa says, وَلَهُ يَدٌ وَوَجْهٌ وَنَفْسٌ. And he has a yad and a wajh and a nafs. Now, as for yad and wajh, I'm not going to translate those. Meaning, I'm just going to say yad and wajh. And I'm not going to say hand or face. But you should know that that's what some people think these attributes mean. Yad, the hand, and wajh, the face. They believe that God has a hand and a face, real ones. Real means literal. Well, nafsun, and he has a nafs. And the meaning of his having a nafs is that he has a self or a being. That means Allah has a real existence. كما ذكره الله تعالى في القرآن, as Allah, exalted is He, mentioned in the Quran, He has these attributes. فما ذكره الله تعالى في القرآن من ذكر الوجه واليد والنفس. So whatever Allah mentioned in the Quran, exalted is He, concerning mentioning the wajh and the yad and the nafs, فهو له صفة بلا كيف. Then a correct answer that covers all of them is that, that covers each one of them, is that it is an attribute of His without a how. It is an attribute of His that does not have any modality or some way about it. It doesn't have any form or shape. It's just not an organ or a limb. You said, could one say life? La, nafs here is not life. Nafs here is that. That means His being. That means His existence, His self. His self. Well, not life. So what do we say? We say Allah is not His attributes, nor is He something else. Allah is not His attributes, nor is He something else. And His attributes are not Him, nor are they something else. وَلَا يُقَالُ إِنَّ يَدَهُ قُدْرَتُهُ أو نعمته لأن فيه إبطال الصفة. Let's stop here. Abu Hanifa wants to go further into the issue of mutashabih attributes. So let's pick that up from next week, let's pick that up next week, insha'Allah ta'ala. Do you have any question I can answer for you? Question, is there a difference between the attribute of destiny and the attribute of will? According to Ash-Shafi'i, they are the same. But it is possible to define the words with different definitions, with different expressions. And then you're going to see if those expressions still mean the same thing or not, though. It suffices you if you want to say they mean the same. You can follow a Shafi'i here and say they mean the same. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.